need. We must vote as soon as possible, hopefully today, to reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act. I thank the President, and I yield the floor.
The Senator from Iowa.
Madam President, I've seen the good that the law called Violence Against Women Act has done in providing victim services in my state of Iowa. We all recognize the harm that flows from domestic violence. It's both on the victims and also the families of victims. I have supported reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act each time that it has come up. Violence Against Women reauthorization on each of these occasions has been highly bipartisan. We have passed consensus bills. We have not played politics with reauthorizing the law. That's until now. This time it seems to be different, and I don't know why it should be. The majority turned this issue into a partisan issue. In the Judiciary Committee, the majority gave no notice that it would inject new matters into the Violence Against Women Act. When the committee held a hearing on this issue, these ideas were not discussed. Their need has not been demonstrated. We do not know exactly how they will work. It was clear that committee Republicans would not be able to agree to this new added material. And of course, the majority refused during negotiations when we asked that they be removed. Republicans will be offering a substitute amendment to the Leahy bill. Probably 80 to 85% of the substitute that we're offering is the same as the Leahy bill. This includes whole titles of the bill. We could have, again, reached a near consensus bill to reauthorize violence against women. But the majority intentionally decided not to change the bill. They didn't want it to pass with an overwhelming bipartisan majority. Now the media has reported that this was a deliberate strategy of the majority. A recent Politico article quoted a prominent Democrat senator. The article said that he, quote, wants to fast-track the bill to the floor, let the GOP block it, then allow Democrats to accuse Republicans of waging a war against women, end of Politico quote. This is a cynical partisan game playing that Americans are sick of. Every town meeting, people say to me, when are you going to get together? Stop the partisanship. And this is especially the case on this bill. Republicans aren't even blocking the bill. We've called for the bill to be brought up. Instead, the majority has taken 6 months to reauthorize this program that has expired last October. That says something about the priorities of the other party. For instance, last week we wasted time on political votes. That seems to be the case in the Senate most of this year. The Senate can pass a bill to reauthorize violence against women by an overwhelming margin. But it seems like the other party doesn't want that to happen. When they say unfavorable things about Republicans and women, they aren't being forthright. A few weeks ago, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee sent out a fundraising email. The email stated in part, quote, now there are news reports that Republicans in Congress will oppose reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act. Enough is enough. The Republican war on women must stop now. Will you chip in $3 by midnight tonight to hold Republicans accountable for their war on women? End of quote of that Democrat missile. The majority had a decision between raising money for campaigns or trying to get Violence Against Women Act reauthorization bill that would actually help these victims. My fellow senators, there is no war on women except a political one. It's a figment of imagination of Democratic strategists who don't want to remember health care reform, unemployment, or high gas prices. Instead of talking about those issues, particularly high gas prices, they'd rather make up a war against women. All evidence points to the other side sure being more interested in raising money. The media has also reported that the bill is coming up now because the Democrats' desire to gin up a Republican so-called war on women were derailed last week, I suppose by other issues. It should be clear at the outset that Republicans are not blocking, have not blocked, and never threatened to block the Senate's consideration of this bill. The Judiciary Committee only reported the bill to the Senate 2 months ago. It was March before the committee filed the usual committee report to the entire Senate. Democrats immediately came to the floor and urged the bill to come up right now. It was up to the majority leader to decide when the bill should be debated. He finally decided not right after the bill was reported out of committee or not right after the committee report was filed, but to do it now. Why not back then? As long as there is a fair process for offering amendments, including our alternative bill, and pointing out the flaws in the majority's bill, this should be a relatively short process. And as the previous speaker said, I hope we can get it done this very day. Several other important points I want to establish. First, I hope a consensus version of violence against women will be reauthorized. If a consensus bill doesn't pass, no rights of women or anyone else will be affected if the bill does not pass. Because contrary to the statements made, there would be no cutbacks of services. Violence Against Women Act, the bill before us, is an authorization bill only, not an appropriation bill. This bill does not allow the expenditure of one dime of money because that results through the appropriations process. Appropriators can and will fund Violence Against Women Act programs regardless of whether this bill is reauthorized. This is exactly what happened over the past year. We think that new issues have arisen since the last Violence Against Women reauthorization. These issues should be addressed in a consensus reauthorization. That can happen. We should give guidance to the appropriators. That's what authorization committees, like in this case the Judiciary Committee, is all about. I support the appropriators continuing to fund Violence Against Women Act while we're trying to put together a consensus bill. Violence against women is being funded despite the expiration of its previous authorization. No existing rights of anyone are affected if violence against women is not reauthorized. No existing rights of anyone are affected if we pass a consensus bill rather than this partisan bill. I should say the majority's bill, not the partisan bill. Second, the majority controls how bills move in the Senate. As I said, the current Violence Against Women reauthorization expired 6 months ago. If reauthorization was so important, I would think the majority party could have moved to reauthorize this bill months ago. They didn't move a bill because no one's substantive rights or funding are at stake. This is true even though the prior reauthorization has expired and a new reauthorization bill has not yet passed. Third, nothing like the majority's bill, where it does not reflect consensus, will become law. It's a political exercise. The other body, meaning the House of Representatives, doesn't seem like it's going to pass it the way that the majority party here wants it to pass. if we want to pass a consensus violence against women reauthorization bill, we ought to start with the alternative that Senator Hutchison and I are going to present to the Senate. Fourth, the majority's bill, as reported out of committee, was and is fiscally irresponsible. According to the Congressional Budget Office, the majority's bill would have added more than $100 million in new direct spending. That will increase the deficit by that same amount. The reason is the immigration provisions that we said previously were non-starters. These were some of the provisions that the majority refused to take out. Those provisions are bad immigration policy. Nonetheless, I'm glad that the majority has now found an offset for this spending. The Republican alternative does more to protect the rights of victims of domestic violence and sex crimes than does, in fact, the majority bill. There are many ways in which this substitute does that. Under the substitute amendment, more money goes to victims, less to bureaucrats. It requires that 10% of the grantees be audited every year. This is to ensure that taxpayer funds are actually being used for the purpose of the legislation, to combat domestic violence. This is a very important point. The Justice Department Inspector General conducted a review of 22 grantees under this law between 1998 and the year 2010. And of these 22 audits, 21 were found to have some form of violation of grant requirements. The violations range from unauthorized and unallowable expenditures to sloppy record-keeping and failure to report in a timely manner. And when this happens, the money's not getting to the victims, and the taxpayers' money is being wasted. Give some examples. In 2010, one grantee was found by the Inspector General to have questionable costs for 93% of the nearly $900,000 they received from the Justice Department. In 2009 audit found that nearly $500,000 of a $680,000 grant was questionable. The fiscal irregularities continue. An Inspector General audit from just this year found that this law's grant recipient in the Virgin Islands engaged in almost $850,000 in questionable spending. Also, a grant to an Indian tribe in Idaho found about $250,000 in improperly spent funds. This included, can you believe it, $171,000 in salary for an unapproved position. In Michigan this year, a woman at the law's grant recipient used grant funds to purchase goods and services for personal use. We should make sure then that violence against women money goes to victims and not to waste like this. That hasn't been the case, obviously, under the current situation. So our Republican substitute deals with this spending problem. The substitute also prevents grantees from using taxpayers' funds to lobby for more taxpayer funds. That will ensure that more money is available for victim services. Money that goes to grantees and is squandered helps no woman or other victims. In addition, the Republican alternative limits the amount of violence against women funds that can go to administrative fees and salaries to 7.5%. That means that money that now is over the 7.5% suggested limit is going to bureaucrats and not to victims. And, of course, the underlying bill, the Leahy bill, contains no such limit. If you want the money to go to victims and not bureaucrats, those overhead expenses should be capped at this 7.5% level. The Republican substitute amendment requires that 30% of the stop grants and grants for arrest policies and protective orders are targeted to sexual assault. The Leahy-Crapo bill sets aside only 20% instead of that 30% to fight sexual assault. The substitute that Senator Hutchison and I offer, hopefully this afternoon, requires that training materials be approved by an outside accredited organization. This ensures that those who address domestic violence help victims based on knowledge and not ideology. This will result in a more effective assistance to victims. The Leahy-Crapo bill contains no such requirement. The Hutchison-Grassley substitute protects due process rights that the majority bill threatens. And I'll give you an instance. The majority bill said that college campuses must provide for, quote, prompt and equitable investigation and resolution, end quote, of charges of violence or stalking. This would have codified a proposed rule of the Department of Education that would have required imposition of a civil standard or preponderance of the evidence for what is essentially a criminal charge, one that, if proved, rightfully should harm reputation. But if established on a barely more probable than not standard, reputations can be ruined unfairly and very quickly. The substitute eliminates this provision. Now the majority has changed their own bill's language. I thank them for that. I take that as an implicit recognition of the injustice of the original language. The substitute also eliminates a provision that allowed the victim who could not prove such a charge to appeal if she lost, creating double jeopardy. The majority bill also would give Indian tribal courts the ability to issue protection orders and full civil jurisdiction over non-Indians based on actions allegedly taking part or place in Indian country. Noting that the Due Process Clause requires that courts exercise jurisdiction over only those persons who have minimum contact with the forum, the Congressional Research Service has raised constitutional questions about this provision. The administration and its supporters in this body pursue their policy agendas headlong without bothering to consider the Constitution. The substitute contains provisions that would benefit tribal women and would not run afoul of the Constitution. We have heard a lot of talk about how important the rape kit provision in the Judiciary Committee bill, those provisions are. I strongly support funds to reduce the backlog of testing rape kits, but that bill provides that only 40% of the rape kit money actually be used to reduce the backlog. The substitute requires that 70% of the funding would go for that purpose and get rid of the backlog sooner. It requires that 1% of the Debbie Smith Act funds be used to create a national database to track the rape kit backlog. It also mandates that 7% of the existing Debbie Smith Act funds be used to pay for state and local audits of the backlog. Debbie Smith herself has endorsed these provisions. The majority bill has no such provisions, making sure that money that is claimed to reduce the rape kit backlog actually does so is pro-victim. True reform in the Violence Against Women reauthorization should further that goal. Combating violence against women also means tougher penalties for those who commit these terrible crimes. The Hutchison-Grassley substitute creates a 10-year mandatory minimum sentence for federal conviction for forcible rape. The majority bill establishes a 5-year mandatory minimum sentence That provision is only there because Republicans offered it, and we won that point in our committee. Child pornography is an actual record of a crime scene of violence against women. Our alternative establishes a one-year mandatory minimum sentence for possession of child pornography where the victim depicted is under 12 years of age. I believe that the mandatory minimum for this crime should be higher. In light of the lenient sentences that many federal judges hand out, there should be a mandatory minimum sentence for all child pornography possession convictions. But the substitute is at least a start. This is especially true because the majority bill takes no action against child pornography. The alternative also imposes a 5-year mandatory minimum sentence for the crime of aggravated sexual assault. This crime involves sexual assault through the use of drugs or otherwise rendering the victim unconscious. The Leahy bill does nothing about aggravated sexual assault. The status quo appears to be fine for the people that are going to vote for the underlying bill if the Hutchison-Grassley amendment's not adopted. Instead, the Hutchison-Grassley amendment establishes a 10-year mandatory minimum sentence for the crime of interstate domestic violence that results in the death of the victim. It increases from 20 to 25 years the statutory maximum sentence for a crime where it results in life-threatening bodily injury to or the permanent disfigurement of the victim. It increases from 10 to 15 years the statutory maximum sentence for this crime when serious bodily injury to the victim results. The Leahy bill contains none of these important protections for domestic violence and the victims thereof. The substitute grant administrative subpoena power to the U.S. Marshals Service is to help them discharge their duty of tracking and apprehending unregistered sex offenders. The Leahy bill does nothing to help locate and apprehend unregistered sex offenders. And the substitute cracks down on abuse and award of U visas for illegal aliens and the fraud in the violence against women self-petitioning process. The majority bill does not include any reforms of these benefits, despite actual evidence of fraud in the program. One of the senators who recently came to the floor complained that there had never been controversy in reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act. But in the past, there were no deliberate efforts to create partisan divisions. We always proceeded in the past on consensus fashion. Domestic violence is an important issue, serious problem. We all recognize that. In the past, we put victims ahead of politics in addressing it. When the other side says this should not be about politics and partisanship, why heavens, we obviously agree. It's the majority that has now decided that they want to score political points above assisting victims. They want to portray a phony war on women because this is an election year. They're raising campaign money by trying to exploit this issue. And I demonstrated that in one of the emails that we come to our attention. There could have been a consensus bill before us today as in the past. There is controversy now because that's what the majority seems to want. We look forward to a fair debate on this bill and the chance to offer and vote on our substitute amendment. That amendment contains much that is in agreement with the Leahy bill. The substitute also is much closer to what can actually be enacted into law to protect victims of domestic violence. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator Senator from Hawaii.
Madam President, I rise today in support of S. 1925, the Violence Against Women Act, reauthorization of 2011. Since its enactment in 1994, VAWA has enhanced the investigation and prosecution of incidents of domestic and sexual violence and provided critical services to victims and their advocates in court. It has truly been a lifeline for women across the country, regardless of location, race, or socioeconomic status. For these reasons, VAWA's two prior reauthorizations were overwhelmingly bipartisan. This year, however, a number of my colleagues are opposing the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization because they object to, among other things, the authority that it restores to Native American tribes to prosecute those who commit violent crimes against Native women. This bill's tribal provisions address the epidemic rates of violence against Native women by enabling VAWA programs to more directly and promptly respond to their concerns and needs. These tribal provisions are critical to the lives of Native women and doubly important to me as chairman of the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs and a Native Hawaiian. Native women are 2.5 times more likely than other U.S. women to be battered or raped. These are extremely disturbing statistics. 34% of Native women will be raped in their lifetimes, and 39% will suffer domestic violence. That's more than 1 out of every 3 Native women. We must come together to put a stop to this. Last summer, I chaired an oversight hearing entitled Native Women Protecting, Shielding, and Safeguarding Our Sisters, Mothers, and Daughters. I heard the heartbreaking series that lie behind the grim and troubling statistics on violence against American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian women. My committee heard from the chief of the Catawba Nation, who gave a moving account of his experience growing up with domestic violence and the impact it had on women and children in his community. He also spoke of the importance of reauthorizing VAWA. We heard from officials who described how existing laws are failing Native women. We heard, for example, that women in tribal communities live in a confusing and dangerous jurisdictional maze in which the absence of clear lines of authority often leads to offenders, many of whom are non-Native men, escaping investigation and prosecution, to say nothing of punishment. This outrageous and unacceptable situation has led to repeated offense against Native women that too often spiral into violence with tragic consequences for the women, their children, and their communities. My committee also heard that Native women are being increasingly targeted by the sex trafficking industry, and that many have, according to police reports from tribal communities across the country, simply vanished into this terrible underworld. A draft bill to address violence against Native women was circulated to a wide range of stakeholders for feedback. This led to strengthened provisions in a draft bill, which I introduced as S-1763, the Stand Against Violence and Empower Native Women Act. The Senate Committee on Indian Affairs held a legislative hearing on my bill the following month and then reported it out of the committee in December. Since then, I've worked closely with my good friend and colleague, Senator Leahy, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, as he developed S. 1925, which now includes the Save Native American Women Act. S. 1925's tribal provisions empower tribal courts to prosecute crimes of domestic violence, dating violence, or violations of protection orders, regardless of the race of the alleged abuser. This bill also strengthens research and programs to address sex trafficking. Since VAWA was enacted 18 years ago and reauthorized twice since then, a hallmark of the law is that it has expanded its protections to classes of once neglected victims. Accordingly, S. 1925's tribal provisions are consistent with VAWA's history, as well as its intent and purpose, which past Congresses have embraced. Last week, 50 law professors from leading institutions across the country sent a letter to Congress expressing their, quote, full confidence in the constitutionality of the legislation and in its necessity to protect the safety of Native women, unquote. And just this week, the White House released a statement of administration policy stating that it strongly supports these provisions, which will, and I quote, bring justice to Native American victims, unquote. I commend Chairman Leahy for his dedicated leadership in developing this bill. He has truly worked in the spirit of aloha by partnering with the Indian Affairs Committee and other offices to craft a VAWA reauthorization bill that reasserts VAWA's intent, purpose, and history. I would also like to say mahalo thank you to each of this bill's other bipartisan sponsors. As we all know, domestic and sexual violence continues to occur, and far too many women across the country are victims of these horrible acts. We have heard from victims, from service providers, and from law enforcement that these crimes can leave victims with lasting emotional and physical scars while endangering their security, their families, and their lives. This bill will strengthen the Violence Against Women Act and extend its protections to include Native women that are underserved in the current system. This is not an issue that should divide us along partisan lines. On the contrary, it should unite us to take a stand against these awful crimes. So I urge you to join me and the rest of S. 1925's co-sponsors to protect our sisters, mothers, and daughters and pass this bill. Madam President, I yield my time, and I thank you very much, Madam President.
Madam President.
Senator from Utah.
Madam President, I rise today to speak about our Constitution's federalist structure and the real danger of the federal government unduly interfering with the ability of states and localities to address activities and concerns in their communities. Everyone agrees that violence against women is reprehensible. The Violence Against Women Act reauthorization has the honorable goal of assisting victims of domestic violence, but it oversteps the Constitution's rightful limits on federal power. It interferes with the flexibility of states and localities that they should have in tailoring programs to meet particular needs of individual communities. And it fails to address problems of duplication and inefficiency. First, violent crimes are regulated and enforced almost exclusively by state governments. In fact, domestic violence is one of the few activities that the Supreme Court of the United States has specifically said that Congress may not regulate under the Commerce Clause. As a matter of constitutional policy, Congress should not seek to impose rules and standards as conditions for federal funding in areas where the federal government lacks constitutional authority to regulate directly. Second, the strings that Congress attaches to federal funding in the VAWA reauthorization restrict each state's ability to govern itself. Rather than interfering with state and local programs under the guise of spending federal tax dollars, Congress should allow states and localities to exercise their rightful responsibility over domestic violence. State and local leaders should have flexibility in enforcing state law and tailoring victim services to the individualized needs of their communities, rather than having to comply with one-size-fits-all federal requirements. Third, even if the federal government had a legitimate role in administering VAWA grant programs, the current reauthorization fails to address many instances of duplication and overlap among VAWA and other programs operated by the Department of Justice and by the Department of Health and Human Services, nor does it address the grant management failings identified by the Government Accountability Office. My opposition to the current VAWA reauthorization is a vote against big government and inefficient spending, and a vote in favor of state autonomy and local control. We must not allow a desire by some to score political points and an appetite for federal spending to prevent states and localities from efficiently and effectively serving women and other victims of domestic violence. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator from Minnesota.
Thank you, Madam President. When my wife Franny and I decided that I should run for Senate, we were greatly influenced by the example set by Senator Paul Wellstone and his wife Sheila. The Wellstones' example served as a constant reminder of what public service is all about. It's about helping others. It's about giving a voice to those who otherwise might go unheard. It's about making the law more just and more fair, especially for those who need its protections the most. Franny and I have a personal responsibility to carry on the Wellstones' legacy. We all do. And you know what? I think that Paul and Sheila would be proud of what we're doing here today. We are on the verge of reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act. Paul and Sheila were extraordinary people, an unlikely couple. Sheila was born in Kentucky to Southern Baptist parents. Paul was born here in Washington, the son of Russian Jewish immigrants. But love and fate, they work in mysterious ways, and they brought Paul and Sheila together. Sheila's family moved to Washington, where she and Paul became high school sweethearts. Paul went to North Carolina for college, and Sheila went back to Kentucky, but a freshman year apart was more than they could bear. Sheila moved to North Carolina to be with Paul. They got married, and a year later, they were proud parents. They eventually would have 2 more children. The Wellstones were a big, happy family. After Paul earned his Ph.D. in political science, the Wellstones moved to Minnesota, where Paul had a successful teaching career at Carleton College. Sheila, meanwhile, worked 2 jobs. She was a full-time mother and a part-time library aide. A happy family life in Minnesota would have been enough for most people, but not for Paul and Sheila. Their compassion knew no limits. They wanted to make the world a better place for others, and they set out to do just that. Paul ran for public office. He and Sheila worked as a team during Paul's Senate campaign, as they did in all aspects of their lives. Paul's opponent outspent him by a large margin, but what Paul and Sheila lacked in resources, they made up for in grassroots support, a tireless work ethic, and an unparalleled commitment to the people of Minnesota. Also, quite a bit of charm. Improbable as it must have seemed at the outset, Paul won. He was elected to the United States Senate in 1990. So the Wellstones went to Washington, the city where they first fell in love. At the time, Sheila wasn't really a public figure. At least she didn't view herself as such. In fact, Sheila was a bit shy, and she avoided public speaking when she could. But Sheila started spending time at women's shelters in Minnesota and elsewhere, listening to painful stories about domestic violence and assault. She realized that there were a lot of women across the country who needed a voice, who needed someone to speak up for them. Sheila set out to become that person. Here's what she said, I quote, "I have chosen to focus on domestic violence because I find it appalling that a woman's home can be the most dangerous, the most violent, and in fact, the most deadly place for her. And if she is a mother, it is dangerous for her children. It's time that we tell the secret. It's time that we all come together to work toward ending the violence," unquote. Sheila matched her words with actions. She became a champion for survivors of domestic violence in Minnesota and throughout the country. Each year she hosted an event in the Capitol to raise awareness about that issue. That annual event continues to this day. And like I said, Sheila and Paul were a team. So Sheila worked very closely with Paul to champion the Violence Against Women Act, a landmark federal law that affirmed our nation's commitment to women's safety. Signed into law in 1994, VAWA increased the number of beds and shelters that were available to women who needed refuge. It provided critical support to law enforcement officers and prosecutors so they could respond more effectively to incidents of domestic violence. It funded support services and crisis centers for victims. And perhaps most importantly, VAWA sent a message. Domestic violence no longer will be tolerated in America. Since VAWA was enacted, incidents of domestic violence have been reduced significantly. VAWA has improved lives. It has saved lives. It is part of the Wellstones' proud legacy. VAWA is part of this institution's legacy, too. When it comes to violence against women, members of the Senate always have been able to come together. VAWA has been reauthorized twice. Both times it had unanimous support in the Senate. Unanimous support. The VAWA reauthorization bill that we're considering today is in keeping with VAWA's bipartisan tradition. Its 61 sponsors come from across the country and from across the aisle, and I am grateful to Senators Leahy and Crapo for their leadership on this bill. The VAWA Reauthorization Act renews our national commitment to prevent and respond to incidents of sexual assault, a heinous crime that remains all too common in America, even while domestic violence is becoming less common. The VAWA Reauthorization Act addresses the alarming rates of violence against women in Indian country by giving tribes jurisdiction to prosecute acts of domestic violence in their communities. And the VAWA Reauthorization Act cuts red tape and spending by consolidating grant programs and improving accountability measures. This is a good bill, and I am proud to support it. I'm also proud to have written two of its provisions. I'd like to thank Chairman Leahy for inviting me to do so and for including those provisions in the final bill. First, the VAWA reauthorization bill includes a provision from the Justice for Survivors of Sexual Assault Act one of the first bills I wrote after being sworn into the Senate. When this bill becomes law, survivors of sexual assault never again will suffer the indignity of paying for forensic medical exams. VAWA provides state and local governments with funding to administer these exams, which also are known as rape kits and are used to collect evidence in sexual assault cases. The problem is that under current law, grant recipients can charge the survivor for the upfront cost of administering the exam, leaving the survivor to seek reimbursement later. Too often, survivors aren't reimbursed. They get lost in the maze of paperwork or are left high and dry when funds run out. Can you imagine if we required crime victims to pay for the police to gather evidence, like fingerprints or DNA from a crime scene? Of course not. And we shouldn't require victims of sexual assault to pay for rape kits. This isn't a partisan issue. It's common sense. I'm grateful to Senator Charles Grassley, the Judiciary Committee's ranking member, for his ongoing support for this bill. He was an original co-sponsor when I introduced it in 2009 and when I reintroduced it last year. Survivors of sexual violence have endured enough already. They should not have to pay for rape kits. And they won't have to once this bill becomes law. The VAWA reauthorization bill also includes the Housing Rights for Victims of Domestic and Sexual Violence Act, legislation that I introduced with Senators Collins and Mikulski last fall. This bill will help women stay in their homes when they are most vulnerable, when they need a roof over their heads the most. The link between violence and homelessness is undeniable. By one account, nearly 40% of women who experience domestic violence will become homeless at some point in their lives. Nearly 40%. Once a woman becomes homeless, she becomes even more vulnerable to physical or sexual abuse. In my state, nearly 1 in 3 homeless women is fleeing domestic violence. And half of those women have children with them. That's not the world that Sheila Wellstone envisioned. Nobody should have to choose between safety and shelter. While the link between violence and homelessness is undeniable, it is not unbreakable. We need shelters and transitional housing programs for women who are fleeing danger. And the VAWA reauthorization bill provides continued support for those programs. But there also are things we can do to prevent women from becoming homeless in the first place. My housing rights legislation will make it unlawful to evict from federally subsidized housing a woman just because she is a victim of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. This bill is for every woman who has hesitated to call the police to enforce a protective order because she was afraid she'd be evicted from her home if she did so. I am grateful to the many wonderful organizations that have worked with me on this bill. They include women's victims advocacy groups like the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault, or MINCASA, and the Minnesota Domestic Abuse Project. They include tenant advocacy groups like the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. They include legal aid societies like Mid-Minnesota Legal Assistance, and they include leaders of the housing industry too. In fact, I recently received a letter from the National Association of Realtors, the Institute for Real Estate Management, and other housing industry representatives expressing their support for this bill. They wrote that they, quote, believe that preserving housing for victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking is critically important, unquote. I could not agree more, and that's exactly what this bill does. Madam President, Sheila Wellstone isn't with us today. Sheila and Paul and their daughter, Marcia, were tragically taken from us too soon. But Sheila's example is with us. Her legacy is with us, and her words are with us. And I'd like to close with those. Here's what Sheila said. We really have to look at the values that guide us. We have to work toward an ethic that respects every individual, to be physically and emotionally safe. No one, regardless of age, color, gender, background, any other factor, deserves to be physically or emotionally unsafe. In a just society, we pledge to act together to ensure that each individual is safe from harm. In a just society, I think we have to say this over and over and over. We are not going to tolerate the violence. And Madam President, the VAWA reauthorization bill is another step toward a more just society, as Sheila described it. And I look forward to it becoming law. Thank you.
Senator from West Virginia.
Madam President, I rise today with the surest conviction that this body, united as a group of Democrats and Republicans, can and will vote to ensure the women and children of this country are free from domestic abuse. I believe that opposing the bill before us would defy every ounce of common sense that I have in my body. I'm a proud sponsor of the Violence Against Women Act, as most of my colleagues here in this body, because it is unfathomable that any individual could oppose efforts to ensure women and children are free from violence. The bill we are currently considering would reauthorize several essential grant programs that have made a tremendous differences in my great state of West Virginia and across this nation. Here's what I've heard from the West Virginia Coalition Against Domestic Violence team coordinators, Sue Joy and Tanya Thomas. The Violence Against Women Act is the most critical piece of federal legislation affecting the safety of survivors of domestic violence and their children in every county of West Virginia. The law supports cost-effective responses to the pervasive and insidious crimes of domestic violence. VAWA funds innovative, successful programs that are the core of our nation's response to domestic violence: sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking. Action taken at the congressional level to end violence against women and children, and even men, echoes through the hills and hollows of most remote communities in my state. Without VAWA, the collaborative efforts of law enforcement, prosecution, victim advocates, and judicial personnel would be fragmented, compartmentalized, and worse, counterproductive to each other. VAWA saves lives. It changes communities. It offers safeties and creates channels of hope. Madam President, we know that since it first passed in 1994, the Violence Against Women Act had reduced domestic violence by more than 50% throughout the critical programs it funds. Still, violence against women and children is a terrifying reality in this country. Let me share with you some startling statistics that illustrate the scope of this problem. According to the West Virginia Foundation of Rape Information and Services, our state sexual assault coalition, 1 in 6 women in West Virginia will be a victim of attempted or completed rape. According to the West Virginia Coalition Against Domestic Violence, on any given day, licensed domestic violence programs in West Virginia provide services to nearly 600 women and children and men. Every 7 minutes, a call is made to domestic violence hotline in West Virginia. 1/3 of homicides in West Virginia are related to domestic violence. More than 2/3 of women murdered in West Virginia are killed by a member of their family or a member of their household. In 2010, there were 11,174 investigations into domestic violence allegations in West Virginia, which required 272,450 hours of law enforcement involvement. This legislation is a fight on behalf of the women whose stories are contained in those numbers, but whose lives are invaluable and more important than any statistic could ever hope to portray. And no one can better speak to the importance of the Violence Against Women Act that every day is improved because of the programs supported by the law. Madam Chairman, growing up in a small community as I did in Farmington, West Virginia, in a loving family, violence against women and children was unfathomable. I could not have ever thought it. The most beautiful people in my life was my mother, my grandmother, my sisters, my aunts, my cousins. They all were the most beautiful people I ever could have hoped to grow up with. My grandmother, affectionately known as Mama Kay, always had been the glue to our family and kept it together and really kept the community together. And she was a symbol of strength, the woman who others would turn to for a place to stay or a hot meal in times of their troubles. And how I grew up, we celebrated and admired the women who raised us and those around us. We thanked them and we loved them, and we showed them our appreciation and respect. It is incomprehensible to me how anyone can make the decision to inflict physical pain on someone else, a woman, a child, or even a man. Truly, life is tough enough without involving violence. Once again, Madam President, for each and every member of the Senate who will cast a vote on this bill, the question comes down to this: what is it that we truly value? What are our priorities? Ensuring that women and children have adequate protection against violence just makes common sense. And to the people of West Virginia, I know this is of the highest priority. Of course, these atrocities are not at all unique to my state. Nationally, domestic violence accounts for 22% of the violent crimes experienced by women and 3% of the violent crimes against men. Approximately 37% of the women seeking injury-related treatment in hospital and emergency rooms where they're there because of injuries inflicted by a current or a former spouse or partner. In tough economic times like those that we are experiencing now, women are more likely to become a victim of domestic violence. According to the National Network to End Domestic Violence is more than 3 times as likely to occur when couples are experiencing high levels of financial strain as when they are experiencing low levels of financial strain. Women whose male partners experience 2 or more periods of unemployment over a 5-year study were almost 3 times as likely to be victims of intimate violence and were women whose partners had stable jobs. 73% of the shelters attributed the rise in abuse to financial issues. Stress and job loss were also frequently cited as causing increased victims seeking shelter. It goes on, and all we're asking for is to make this a nonpartisan issue. Come together as Americans, come together as senators, not worrying about our political differences. This is one bill that brings us all together for a common cause that's the most decent cause, and it's something that's needed in America. I urge the support of all of my colleagues to please support this, and let's come back together as Americans. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from North Carolina.
Today I rise to join my colleagues in calling for passage of the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act. I'm disheartened that in the last several months, petty partisanship and gamesmanship has held up policies crucial to women. Since the law was originally passed on a bipartisan basis in 1994, the annual incidence of domestic violence has decreased by 53%. Many victims, rather than hiding in fear, are now reporting incidents of abuse. Reports of abuse have increased by 51%, and this law has transformed our criminal justice system and victim support systems. The law has worked well because it encourages collaboration among law enforcement, health and housing professionals, and community organizations to prevent and respond to intimate partner violence. In one recent instance in my state, a man was on pretrial release after being charged with stalking his wife. Thanks to the STOP grant funding, which is services and training our officers and prosecutors, he was being monitored. This individual was being electronically monitored and was caught violating the conditions of his release when he went onto his estranged wife's home. The supervising officer was immediately notified of this violation, and police officers found the man with the help of GPS and arrested him in his estranged wife's driveway. Thank goodness this woman was protected, and this incident did not add another victim to the 73 deaths caused by domestic violence each year in North Carolina. Unfortunately, though, the well-being of women in North Carolina and around the country hangs in balance until we in Congress take action on this act. Domestic violence also hurts our economy. It costs our health care system $8.3 billion each year. The reauthorization of this act streamlines crucial existing programs that protect women while recognizing the difficult fiscal decisions facing the federal government today. 13 existing programs would be consolidated to 4, which will reduce administrative costs and avoid duplication. New accountability provisions will also require strict audits and enforcement mechanisms to aim to ensure that these funds are used wisely and efficiently. In fact, Title V of this bill includes one of my bills, the Violence Against Women Health Initiative. My bill provides vital training and education to help healthcare providers better identify the signs of domestic violence and sexual assault. It helps medical professionals assess violence and then refers patients to the appropriate victim services. This training would have helped Yolanda Haywood, a woman who, as a young mother of 3, found herself in an abusive marriage. Her husband abused her regularly and one night punched her in the face and split her lip that it sent her to the emergency room. She obviously needed stitches. As she sat on the examination table, the physician who was sewing her lip back asked, "Who did this to you?" Yolanda quietly said, "My husband." The physician responded by telling her she, quote, "needs to learn how to duck better." Well, Yolanda spent the next several years learning how to duck before finally leaving that abusive relationship. Empowered by her experience, she went to medical school and now teaches students at a prestigious university the importance of identifying and treating domestic violence and sexual assault, as well as working in an ER. In a recent visit to a women's domestic shelter in Charlotte, I met a counselor who shared this story with me. A young boy had just been at the shelter and had spent his first night. And the next morning, this counselor was talking to this young boy. And he said, "I slept with both eyes shut last night." And the counselor said to the young boy, "Well, how do you usually sleep?" And he said, "Well, I usually sleep with one eye open and one eye closed, because the last time that I slept with both eyes closed, my mommy and I both got hurt." So this is the kind of experience that this bill will help. This will protect women and children. For all of the progress we've made combating violence against women, this must continue to be a priority. I urge each of my colleagues to support the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act, because it literally saves lives in North Carolina and around the country while ensuring a better future for our children. Thank you, Madam President.
Senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I rise to talk about